Okay, I'm just going to come out and say this right off the bat. This is actually my least favourite of the Harry Potter films, which is really kind of ironic, given that the book is actually my favourite of the books. Yeah, I know, that's going to seem kind of weird, but that's just a testament really to how sort of poor an adaptation I actually think this is. Really, I don't think it's a bad film by any means. In terms of what they did in adapting it from the book, I think they did a rather poor job here. So to begin with, we have a very different look to this film that we had with the two Chris Columbus films. There's far less of the sort of brighter colours around Hogwarts. Hogwarts is a far different kind of setting, a very different kind of setting now than you saw in the first two films, but I'll get to that sort of later on. Obviously, there's less sort of colour, there's less sort of bright, upbeat kind of atmosphere maybe to this film, which is maybe kind of right because, things are getting a little bit more intense in terms of the overall story to Harry Potter now. They are getting kind of sort of less sort of cheerful, this is probably the first of the books where the ending isn't, like completely happy. So maybe it's right that maybe there's a bit of a sort of more dreary, more kind of darker tone to this kind of film, but it definitely does have a bit too much of a contrasting difference from the first two films, the first two Chris Columbus films, I think, and I think it's a bit too abrupt a change for my liking. So the first thing that really kind of bugs me is the very first scene where we see Harry doing magic outside school. That's wrong, and it's not in the book, so I don't really know what that's about. What is in the book is Harry receiving quite a lot of letters from people during the dead of night while he's trying to do his homework, and they cut that out, and instead they just put in this rather pointless scene of Harry doing magic outside school. Don't know what that's about, really. They would have been better off really just starting with Aunt Marge arriving, really, if they're going to cut the first chapter out. Yeah, I kind of like Aunt Marge's portrayal in this. She's very much sort of a bit of a know-it-all, a bit of wanting to put Harry in his place, and the feeling of that she's making Harry angry by talking about his family in such a bad way. It kind of works, but because it goes on for less long than it goes on in the book, I think it's less sort of understandable why Harry lose control and blow up his aunt like that. Also, I don't know if I've said this before in either of the previous two videos, I don't really like Daniel Radcliffe as an actor, to be honest. I don't think he's very good as Harry in any of these films, to be honest. And this is one particular scene where I think he's rather poor. His emotions and getting angry here, it doesn't really resonate with me. But the effects on Aunt Marge blowing up and all that was really good. There's a slight change from the book where she actually flies away up into the sky. Presumably, it's possible that she could have, kept floating up and up and up until she reached outer space and could have suffocated. Obviously, the wizards got to her before that happened, but I believe in the book she just is on the ceiling for a while, and it's just kind of silly and kind of sort of oh god, imagine what the people at the Ministry must have to go to. But the idea that Aunt Marge could have just floated away up into outer space and actually died, that's a little bit more frightening, but it definitely makes for a good scene on its own, and I really like the effects on Aunt Marge blowing up. That's pretty awesome. So obviously, then you get to the night bus, which it's exactly as described in the book. It's a triple-decker, violetly purple bus, basically. Stan Shunpike, he comes across as a bit mean-spirited, to be honest. He came across as quite a sort of friendly, kind of very sort of down-to-earth, easygoing kind of guy, the book. And here he's a bit more sort of can't be bothered, it's just a day job, not really all that interested in Harry and what he's up to. So that was a little bit odd. You have obviously the additional shrunken head voiced by Lenny Henry. Kind of a random thing to add into the film like that, but I guess it made for a few laughs, amusing moments with the night bus and sort of understanding, the sort of magic that it works with. The sort of major thing here really is that obviously we find out about Sirius Black. He's escaped from Azkaban and all that. We kind of get sort of very little backstory to Black, but we get enough of it. It's far worse later on, but I'll get to that later. The bigger thing that kind of bugs me really is the sort of big kind of thing that Harry's going through at this point in the book. Really, the thing that he's really worried about is that he's done magic outside school. He did magic outside school in the first scene, and he didn't really seem too bothered about that. So this makes even less sense, really, if you have not read the book. This is something that's kind of really worrying him, and he thinks he's going to get expelled if he gets caught. And then he runs into the Minister of Magic, and he thinks, "Oh well, I'm buggered now." You don't really get that at all in the film. It's kind of glossed over. There's no real kind of major mention of it. He just kind of says at one point, I did magic outside school and I might not expelled them. And he just says, no. That's not particularly well done. And a crucial scene from the book is cut out, which I do not understand why they've cut this out. For one thing, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley have very little to do in this film, and this was a really important scene between the two of them in the book. Harry overhears them arguing about the fact that Sirius Black is after Harry, and I thought this was a really important scene, first of all, because, it felt very natural. The argument that Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had between each other felt very much like a kind of couple's argument, but, with a much more serious matter at hand here. But you also get the impression that Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, they care for Harry like a son, in a sense, really. And you never really get that, I don't think, from any scenes, certainly in this film, that I saw, really. And we also never get any kind of impression that Arthur Weasley wants to tell Harry about this, but has been told not to. And that his wife is also trying to convince him not to tell him. So this is a really important scene, I think, first of all, for kind of sort of emphasising the importance of this important plot point that Black is supposed to be after Harry, and also to sort of show that how much Mr. and Mrs. Weasley genuinely care for Harry, and perhaps also maybe to just sort of give Harry a little bit of an explanation maybe about the fact that, what is going on here exactly, why Fudge was so lenient with him. So I think it was a really important scene for the book, and I do not understand why they cut it out. So eventually Harry gets onto the Hogwarts Express, and we obviously get the Dementor scene from the book where Harry passes out. Again, kind of crucial sort of details are kind of glossed over, what Harry goes through during the scene, what he experiences, how it contrasts with what everybody else experienced, why he was so much worse than everyone else. But I do have to say, I absolutely love the Dementor design in this film. I remember when I saw this scene in the theatre when it first came out, I absolutely shit my pants when that Dementor entered the compartment. That was really terrifying. But I never really imagined the Dementors to be quite as terrifying as they actually ended up being. I imagined them something sort of more like the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come from A Christmas Carol, and they're a lot more frightening than I would imagine. It's a really good design that you've got for the Dementors there. So now we get to Hogwarts, and now I guess I can talk about, the layout of Hogwarts and the design of it. I think it's a lot better than the two Chris Columbus films. I think it looks much more serene. It looks much more like a sort of fantasy kind of setting, whereas in the two Chris Columbus films, Hogwarts, it does kind of just look like a ruin that's been used for a film, basically, which is essentially what it is. Whereas here it actually looks like a magical kind of castle, a kind of mystical sort of world, with bridge that goes across that cliff face, and with the Whomping Willow being set out on a hill, and Hagrid's hut being sort of much further out in the grounds. And I suppose it doesn't really work in a sense of continuity, since Hogwarts looks completely different in this film than it looks in either of the previous two films. If you're just viewing the film on its own, I think Hogwarts looks a lot better in this film than it did in the previous two. What else? I suppose we got the classes. We got Professor Trelawney, played by Emma Thompson, very well. And I have to say, I really like what they did in the film. This sort of additional sort of thing with Hermione, coming and going in all her classes, because obviously she's using the time turner throughout the film, and Ron and Harry don't really understand what's going on. Something that's not in the book, but they've added into the film because obviously it works a lot better in the film than it would as in the book, is Hermione not being there in one shot, and then we cut back to them and she is there. She just sort of appears seemingly out of nowhere, and I think that's really creative. That's not something you could do in a book, and it's something you can do in a film, and I think it's really creative the way they did that. And it's something you actually probably wouldn't notice until you saw the film maybe a couple more times. You maybe wouldn't notice it the first time, except the fact that Ron says, "Where did you come from?" Then obviously we have the scene with the hippogriff, and he hurts Malfoy. That's pretty much as is in the book, except for a little bit of tension between Ron and Hermione. And also, there's a bit where Harry rides off on Buckbeak, and there's kind of a "I'm the king of the world" type moment where he's riding over the lake. I'm like, that's a little bit sort of overkill, really, on the sort of drama and the kind of sort of overly emotional stuff. And it doesn't really bear much importance to the actual film, really. It's just kind of there for a sort of a great sort of epic moment or something. And no, I don't really understand the point of it other than, what's the word? Oscar baiting, maybe? trying to make a famous scene in the film, almost, it seemed like to me. Then Harry, obviously, when he is not going to Hogsmeade, speaks to Lupin, and he finds out, why he went to pieces during the attack of the Dementor. And then something that he finds out here in the film, which he doesn't actually find out until a little bit later in the book, is that Lupin knew Harry's father, which is kind of spoiled by the fact that at this stage Harry doesn't know that his father and Sirius Black were friends. And in the book, this becomes kind of important because Harry then figures out, oh, well, if you knew my father, you must have known Sirius Black as well. But at this stage of the film, Harry doesn't know that his father and Sirius Black were friends, so he obviously doesn't come to this conclusion. So I don't understand why they've moved it. That doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. So, again, it's kind of jumbling up the plot a little bit, and it's not making as much sense, and I don't understand why they've done that. Another crucial scene, really, I think, from the book, is where Snape takes the Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson because Lupin is feeling a bit unwell, and obviously the reasons why he's feeling unwell is revealed later on in the story, and again, kind of glossed over, really. Ron doesn't have a detention where he sees that Lupin is not in the hospital wing, so he must be away or something, he concludes. But the other crucial thing, which is not in the film, is the fact that Snape is just kind of generally nasty in the class. He's being kind of horrible to the students, but there is no sort of mention of the fact that he thinks Lupin is a terrible teacher, which is kind of the big thing in the book, and the students at the end of the lesson are all kind of saying, well, why has Snape got it in for Lupin so much? And it's not in the film. Again, it's a crucial point, and I don't understand why they've changed it. But obviously, another sort of glaring thing that has been cut out of this film, which I know a lot of the fans were kind of upset about at the time, over time I've come to see as a bit more of an understandable change. Quidditch is barely in this film. There's a brief scene of Harry falling off his broom, but that's it, really. It's kind of crucial, really, because in the book, the Gryffindor Quidditch team actually win the Quidditch Cup, and it's the first time since Harry joined the team that they've actually done that. It's a very kind of emotional scene, and kind of one of the most triumphant moments in Harry's life up until that point in the book. It's a very memorable scene in the book, but it's not actually all that important to the plot of the actual story, so I can understand why they've cut it. But it is disappointing to see that be cut, because it's such a great scene that when Gryffindor win the Quidditch Cup. Falls off his broom when he sees the Dementors. But there's still kind of an emphasis on the fact that Gryffindor lost the match and the fact that Harry's broom got destroyed. And seeing as how you're cutting the rest of the Quidditch tournament out of the film, those aren't really particularly important points, so I don't understand why they kept those things in. To be honest, really, you could have just maybe had Harry flying around on his broom just, during the weekend just for a bit of an enjoyment, and then seeing the Dementors and falling off. You didn't really need for it to be Quidditch. You could have just maybe said, there isn't any Quidditch in this. This is puzzling me, why they've left things like this in. Then obviously Fred and George give Harry the Marauders map. He goes into Hogsmeade, tells Ron and Hermione about it. That's pretty much the book, except for the fact that Harry is the only one that overhears the conversation between the teachers about the fact that Black betrayed his mother and father. And it's a much longer scene and a much more gripping scene in the book, which absolutely had me on the edge of my seat, finding all this stuff about, and it's such a short scene, it's shaved down so much in the film. I understand obviously they're under a bit more time constraints to get through stuff, but it's rushed through so quickly, and it's so frustrating, really, when it was such a great scene in the book to see it get shaved down so much. And then there's an overly emotional scene afterward, which isn't in the book, where Harry is just sort of getting angry about the fact that Black betrayed them. And the other crucial thing that is cut out here is there's no mention of the Fidelius charm. And basically, in the book, they explain that they assign a particular person to be a secret keeper. And as long as he keeps the secret, Harry's parents will not be found by Voldemort. It's just the way that the charm works. It's believed that Black is the secret keeper for the Potters, and he betrays them to Voldemort, and obviously Voldemort is able to find them as a result of that. Not mentioned in the sort of backstory of Black betraying them. They just say Black betrayed them, basically. They don't actually explain how or why Black betrayed them. How much more time would have explaining that actually taken up? Then there's an interesting scene, I think, where we get a little bit of a window into this sort of subplot of Ron's pet rat Scabbers and Hermione's cat Crookshanks, fighting constantly. And one particularly funny line from Ron, where he says to Harry, "Oh, you've seen how that cat has been lurking about my rat and, trying to get at it and everything. Well, maybe you have, Ron. But we certainly haven't. No, Crookshanks is in like one scene, I think, prior to this. And I don't think I can recall a single scene where both him and Scabbers are present on screen together. So, why have that brief mention of this plot, of this subplot, if we're not going to see any more of it? It seemed in the film like they were trying to sort of emphasise this, sort of alluding to Ron and Hermione getting together by the end of the series kind of thing. And this is kind of the early stages of it. In the book, they basically just fall out and then later make up. There's no real sort of tension between the two of them. Like, they could ultimately get together here. That really doesn't happen in the books until Goblet of Fire. They wanted to put these little moments in between Ron and Hermione, but they cut out this subplot where the two of them fall out and then later make up. Why do that if you want to emphasise the whole Ron and Hermione thing? Another crucial scene cut. Black enters Gryffindor Tower and seemingly tries to attack Ron. He's there holding a knife over Ron's bed, and obviously no one believes Ron, and then later on it turns out, yes, Black did enter Gryffindor Tower. Just stepping up, the kind of security that they're going to need in Hogwarts after this point, to try and stop Black from getting to Harry, and kind of emphasising the fact that, even with all these Dementors guarding Hogwarts, Black is still able to get in, and they don't understand why he's able to do it, and it makes the students and the teachers feel far more unsafe, and the tension is really starting to build. Such a crucial scene. Not in the film. Why? Obviously they need to cut certain scenes for time. The Quidditch, I can understand. There are even a couple of lessons, I think, that we see in the film that they probably, for time could have cut. That scene where Black enters Gryffindor Tower, that is a crucial plot point, and I don't understand why they've cut that. Another thing that they probably could have cut, really, to be honest, is Buckbeak, attacking Malfoy. Then there's a hearing about, the safety of Buckbeak, and eventually he's sentenced to death. And it's kind of sort of shaved down rather than just being completely cut, like I think they probably could have done. We see Buckbeak attack Malfoy, then later on we hear about a hearing after it's happened. There's no mention of a hearing before it's happened. We just see Hagrid later on, and Hagrid saying, they're saying to Hagrid, how did the hearing go? What hearing? We haven't been told about a hearing. To be honest, really, I think they could have just shaved that down and had, Buckbeak go a bit wild or a bit mental for some kind of random reason, and then maybe have Cornelius Fudge be there and say, oh, sorry, we'll have to put Buckbeak down or something. Another sequence or, scene from the book, which really had me on the edge of my seat, I think, is where Harry is seen in Hogsmeade where he's not supposed to be. Then he sort of rushes back to Hogwarts. Snape finds him, and he starts to sort of suspect Harry and starts to sort of wonder, is Snape going to find out that Harry has been in Hogsmeade? And this was such a tense scene in the book, and I remember being on the edge of my seat when I was reading this. It is in the film, but it's far less tense because Snape doesn't really suspect Harry of really doing anything. He just finds him wandering around at night. There's an additional bit where Harry sees Peter Pettigrew on the map, and to be honest, that actually does kind of make sense, really, because Peter Pettigrew, as we find out later on, actually is there in Hogwarts the whole time, so therefore he's on the map. So logically, Harry should see him on the map at some point, so that kind of makes sense. But they then move this scene that takes place in Snape's office, where Snape is very suspicious of Harry, to night, where Snape isn't really all that suspicious of Harry, and Lupin finds the map. It's less tense, and it's less engaging to me. I don't find it as interesting, but at least it's not being cut completely. There's another subplot which I guess, again, I can understand why they cut, which is Hermione being very overworked and having too many classes, and Ron thinking it's basically impossible for Hermione to attend every class. It's briefly mentioned in the film, and Hermione being overworked is basically not mentioned at all. I can kind of understand why they've cut that, really, because it isn't important to the main plot. But I think, at the same time, it is kind of important sort of character development of Hermione, because it's showing that she has a bit of a weakness, that even though she is a great student and she knows a lot of spells, she can be overworked, and she can find dealing with all of this work a little bit difficult at times. It is going to stress her out, the same as it will do anyone. Work is hard. However good you are at that work and however hard you work, it is hard. It's not important to the main plot, but I think it is important character development of Hermione. Professor Trelawney's prophecy is in there, but it isn't really brought up after she makes the prophecy, really. Harry doesn't even mention it to anyone afterwards. Once again, I don't understand why they've left that in there, really. I mean, I suppose because it becomes important in later books. They felt the need, well, we'd better leave it in because it might become important later on. But since it isn't mentioned again in the actual film, it comes across as a little bit pointless. That's just a case of them leaving it in by default, really. They left it in because they basically had to, but they didn't actually want to do anything with it. Hermione's punch, it's a little bit later than it is in the book, because basically it comes about because of the last Quidditch match that's going to take place, and obviously the Quidditch, for the most part, has been cut from the film, so they had to kind of move it. And it is actually kind of effective. It is showing sort of Hermione being completely enraged, and she's been trying to bite her tongue all this time, just trying to put up with Malfoy, and he's just gone too far this time, and Hermione just decides that enough is enough, and she wants to do something about Malfoy. What's weird, though, is they change it a little bit from the book, and rather than it just being the sake of Hermione punching Malfoy and then having a go at him later on, it's the other way around in the film. Hermione is enraged at Malfoy, doesn't do anything at first, then when Malfoy goes a little bit too far, she punches him. I don't know, I think it may have been more effective the other way around. I think all that emotion right off the bat like that is probably more effective. Also, Tom Felton is not very good in that scene when Hermione punches him. He doesn't really react in kind of a very natural way. And I think also they made a mistake in the setting that they chose for that scene, because when Hermione punches him, he also hits the rock that is behind him. That would basically knock you out, I think, wouldn't it? The punch itself is quite effective, but the way Tom Felton reacts to it is not particularly good. So I guess it's okay, that scene, but it could have been better. Ron and Hermione make up even before Scabbers reappears in the book. They apologise. Hermione apologises to Ron, actually. In the film, even when Scabbers reappears, they are still arguing. I don't understand, again, are they trying to show a bit more sort of sexual tension between the two of them or something? The Marauders map is not given any backstory at all. I don't understand why they've cut that as well. That was such an important point, showing, the bond between Black, James Potter, and Lupin, and I suppose in a sense Pettigrew as well. It's kind of the tool that brought the four of them together. It also doesn't explain what the significance of the Shrieking Shack was. There's no mention of the knot on the Whomping Willow that causes it to freeze, that it enables the four of them, to sneak out to the Shrieking Shack. No mention of the fact that the Whomping Willow was planted because of Lupin, to conceal the fact that he was a werewolf. So many important backstory points to, Lupin, Black, and James's friendship that are not mentioned in the film. Again, people are probably going to tell me that, this is all just for the sake of time, but these are important points. Why cut them? Why cut them but leave in, things like Buckbeak's trial or Hermione punching Malfoy or, the Quidditch match or anything like that? Harry also, in this scene, I notice, knocks Snape out with Expelliarmus, which is the disarming spell. That shouldn't happen, should it? And again, there's so much important exposition in the book. I mean, honestly, if you haven't read the book, just read this part of the book. If you just want more explanation on exactly what has been going on between, Black and Lupin and James Potter, and such a huge amount of exposition and explanation as to what's been going on that we get in the scene in the Shrieking Shack that is all basically cut. And instead, they decide to replace it with basically just action scenes with, Lupin becoming a werewolf and him attacking everyone, and then him going on a rampage, and then later on with Harry and Hermione and him chasing after them as well. They cut out important plot points for the sake of some action, really. But the time-turning scene with Harry and Hermione, again, kind of shaved down again in terms of important points, really, and why you can't change the past and everything like that. And instead is just given a few additional moments where the two of them do intervene with what's going on with Harry, Ron, and Hermione in Hagrid's hut to leave, and then Hermione thinking that she's seen something strange or something, and then a weird moment where the future Hermione sees the back of her head and is like, I don't like the look of the back of my head there. I don't understand what that's about. That doesn't seem very Hermione-like. Why would she care about things like that exactly? And the Patronus scene as well, where Harry thinks he sees his dad, again, goes on a bit too long, really. It's quite a short scene in the book, and overly dramatic music and overly dramatic sort of emphasis on the Patronus and triumphant things going on and everything. And all done for the sake of drama in film. And I don't know, it seemed like a much more simpler kind of scene in the book. You know, I don't like what they've done with that, really. The other crucial thing in the book is that time is of the essence, really. They have to get Black out of there as quickly as possible. Whereas in the film, it goes on a lot longer and there's much more sort of time for Black to say goodbye. I mean, maybe that's kind of nice because, you know, I remember being a bit sad the first time I saw this film because by this stage I knew that Black was going to die about 2 years after this. So I guess it's kind of nice, you know, to sort of see a kind of something of a proper farewell between Harry and Black there, but it kind of goes against the idea that you know, Harry and Hermione only have a limited amount of time to fix everything. Less tension, I suppose, is the best way to put that. There's far less tension in the whole sequence between Harry and Hermione trying to save Buckbeak and Black. And then finally, at the end, Black gives Harry the firebolt. And the fact that Harry knows Black has given Harry the firebolt makes the whole receiving the firebolt thing kind of pointless, to be honest. It doesn't really tie into anything else. This is obviously, again, just a case of Harry actually needs the firebolt in the next film, so we better give him the firebolt in this film. We're just going to stick it onto the end of the film. After that becomes such an important plot point in the book where Harry receives the firebolt at Christmas and he doesn't know who sent it to him. It's only at the very end of the book that we actually find out that it was Black who sent it to him. So, yeah, that's kind of a bit of a middle finger, really, to anybody who was a fan of that point of the book like I was. That's just butchering it completely and just sticking it onto the end for the sake of the next film. I mean, why not just have Harry receive the firebolt in the next film if that's what you were going to do? So overall, yeah, just not a good adaptation at all. So many important points are cut out, so many plot elements and bits of explanation here and there are shaved down, and I don't understand why they've moved certain things around and everything. But with that said, Gary Oldman was very good as Sirius Black. Hogwarts looks a lot better in this film. The basic look and feel of this film, it feels much more like a kind of serious adult-like story, whereas the look of the first two films, they do very much look like kids' films. The book, it's my favourite of the books because it just had me on the edge of my seat the whole time. There's so many important points to the story, had me on the edge of my seat when I was reading the book that are not in the film, and it really disappointed me. This is not a bad film by any means. I do like this as a film, but it is, without question, my least favourite of the films, and is definitely the worst adaptation of all 8 of the Harry Potter films. Okay, well that's that, guys. I will see you again for another review.